In this demo, I'm going to be looking at what is your strategy for completing your task 2. Just checking if this microphone, okay, the microphone seems to be on. So what is our strategy now for completing part 2? The major thing that was lacking in part 1 was linking to theory and then linking to the case study. What we are doing is we are waiting for YouTube videos from the lecturer, and we are just doing what the lecturer has done on the video versus answering your part 1 question. So what we are actually doing is we are reading the POE document, or what we are meant to be doing is, this is where we start. Read the POE document a couple of times, make yourself familiar with the POE document. Know exactly what is required in the scenario. From then, we look at the POE document and then we go straight to the marking rubric. Let me go straight to my marking rubric now. Where's my marking rubric? For part 2, there's 3 activities here. The first activity says I need to work with group policy. So what are they going to be giving me marks for? And this is how we're going to answer the question according to the mark allocation. Also, some of the students are still just taking screenshots without writing notes on a screenshot. This time around, I was lenient and I marked the screenshots without the notes. In part 2 and in the final POE, if you just give me screenshots and you've not told me what is the screenshot, I'm going to give you 0 for the screenshot. It is critically important that you explain what is the screenshot, because if there's someone that is not your lecturer that is marking your work and you've not explained to them, they don't know what is Server 2016, and they got a memo and they're marking your work. If they follow the work, the memo, and they don't know about Server 2016, then what's going to happen? They've got nothing to mark. They don't know what the screenshot means. So you need to explain every single screenshot. Also, taking pictures or taking screenshots of the steps that's involved in installation of server or installation is not required. So if it's got 20 screenshots, that doesn't mean you're going to get 20 marks. That's not how it works. A screenshot must be meaningful. So you give the minimum amount of screenshots with the maximum amount of explanation. Makes sense? So this is what is required. Looking at activity 1, group policy, it says, implement the effective and complete group policy strategy that considered access control, user rights, permissions, restrictive desktop, management of quotas, and administrative task requirements. In other words, they are saying, in my group policy, now group policy is an object that allows me to restrict certain settings or to set certain settings on multiple computers, either in an organizational unit, in a site, in a domain. So I can link it all on a computer itself, but we're going to use it to set certain settings for all of the users that might be in a department, for all of the users that might be part of the company. If it's all of the users that's part of the company, we set it on the domain. If it's all of the users that's in a department, we set it on that department's OU. Your strategy demonstrates the use of group policy tools and must include the creation and assignment of all GPOs associated with the Active Directory object security, evidence of how GPO application is controlled, and evidence of how assignment is managed. The requirement here to get 2 marks, group policy solution follows best practices and adequately for assigning and applying GPOs to all OUs. In other words, you have applied the policies that you have determined to the respective organizational units based on the case study. The group policy solution demonstrates evidence that appropriate tools were used. Example, Group Policy Management Console or GPMC. I think the letters there are mixed up. The next one, Group Policy Solution adequately implemented the GPOs configured in the following areas: access control settings, user rights selected, permission selected, quota management selected, restrictive desktop settings. Evidence of how the GPO application is controlled in adequately configured and demonstrated. This includes but is not limited to inheritance blocking. So for each of these marks, I need to show a screenshot that shows inheritance blocking has been configured and what does it mean? Why are you configuring inheritance blocking and how does it relate to the case study? An example of that would be if a specific department has to have different settings for their desktops or for their security on their computers, then I can block inheritance of the domain's policy settings. Does that make sense? So the domain has got default policy settings that applies to everyone. If I want to not get the same policies as the domain, in other words, in this department, it must be separate, then I can implement inheritance blocking. Enforce policies. This, regardless of whether people lower down in the organization say it must be blocked, I can enforce a policy setting so that it applies to everyone. That's enforced. Loop back processing. When you go and reboot a computer, does the user policy or the computer policy apply? Loop back processing is so that you can set the computer policy to override the user policy. Security filtering, another way in which I can limit to whom the policy applies. In other words, I can set up a group, I can add users to the group, and this group, the policy is either going to apply or not to apply. So if I say security filtering, for this particular group of users, the policy must not apply to them, or a different policy must apply to them. Can you see what's happening now? So the policy is being filtered on different levels and in different ways. Evidence of how GPO assignment is managed in the adequately configured to demonstrate this includes and is not limited to site-linked GPOs. So if I go and have a look here now at my virtual computer, and I go into, what is this? Hyper-V Manager, and there's my computer. Let me log into my computer. If I'm looking at my computer now, this is even smaller. Let's just restore this. Okay, this is bigger. Where am I now? Server Manager. I'm just going to close all of the screens that I have open. I'm on my desktop and I'm going to open up Server Manager. So I press the Windows key on the keyboard and then I press Server Manager and I go into Server Manager. We should all be familiar with Server Manager by now. In Server Manager, I'm then going to go to Tools and I want to manage Group Policy. So I'm going to look for Group Policy Management. So I go into Group Policy Management. Is it open? There's it here. There's my Group Policy Management. And I can see in Group Policy Management that there's my forest. I've got a domain, and my domain is called collegesubain.com. And I click here to see link group policy objects. I can see on the domain, I've got a group policy object. Then if I expand, I can see that I've got organizational units that I've created. And then I can see, is there any linked GPOs here? There's no linked GPOs. So nothing is applying to this particular GPO. If I needed to set a GPO there, then I would simply right click and I can say link, create a GPO in this domain or link it here. So I can then go ahead and create the new group policy object there. I'm just going to have a look at the default domain policy. Now, this is the one that's there already. Generally, you don't modify this. You will do what? You'll copy it, and then you'll make modifications on the copied GPO. So you can copy it because you don't want to. If you want to go back to the original settings, then you got your original GPO there. Now, what is inside this GPO? So location, it's linked to this one here. It's enforced and enabled. Can you see here? It tells you whether the policy is enforced. And then security filtering. This is where I'm going to add groups if I need to do security filtering. So there's your default domain policy. And then if I there's it here, I can enforce it. I've right-clicked and it says enforce the policy. I can go to edit the policy, and now it opens up the group policy editor, management editor. In this editor now is where I'm going to actually set the group policy objects. Now here you can see there's computer configuration that applies to computers and user configuration that applies to users. The policies that you have, if I want to set a policy on the computers in the domain, then I can, this is to install software. There's Windows settings here. And under Windows settings, I can see that there's a startup scripts or there's security settings. So under security settings, these are common settings that we would configure. For example, account policies, we would set password policies, we would set local policies, restricted groups, etc. So these are the policies that I would be setting now. If I needed to set a policy, I simply double click on the policy. Currently, you can see it's set to password history, set to 24, and the characteristics. But if I wanted to modify, remember, you're not going to do it on the default. You would create your own policies. So this is where I find and I manage group policy objects. Now going back to how to go about and how to do this. I have seen that this section is speaking about group policy. What do I need to do? I need to go into Learn. So from Learn, I'm going to look now, okay, group policy objects are covered under which learning unit? It's covered under Learning Unit 3. In Learning Unit 3, what resources are available to me? In other words, what theory is available to me? Remember, your textbook has got summaries of what needs to be done. It does not necessarily have all of the details on how to accomplish certain tasks. What we need to do is to locate that information. So the ways in which we can locate that information is to look at, firstly, learn, go into learn and say, okay, there's theme 1 that's speaking about Windows group policy in Windows Server. They give us a number of links, some videos, and then an activity here. So I go ahead and I watch the YouTube videos, and then I search for similar videos. For example, I came across this one.
And in this lecture, you're going to be learning about
Introduction
group policy.
to Windows Server.
Now, group policy is a tool that is used by systems administrators to quickly and easily make configuration changes to users and computers within Active Directory. I say easily because you can make one change in group policy and affect hundreds or thousands of workstations.
Similarly, I went ahead and looked for others. I searched what are the different Server 2016 videos that I can find on YouTube or other sites. So apart from looking at just the one video that was provided here, go and look at other videos on how to accomplish the task. So do not become dependent on lecture videos. Go out, you need to learn the skills of how to solve problems on your own. Now, how am I solving the problem? I'm looking at my available resources. What do I have? I have Learn that's available to me. On Learn, what is there? A number of links to articles that gives me more information on group policy object, group policy settings, group policy management, group policy configuration. On how to actually do the task in my server, there's a number of demonstrations and videos that's available on YouTube. I can go and watch those. Apart from YouTube, there's other websites that have videos that's available. So I start here. I then go and I look at my textbook. What do they have on group policy objects in my textbook? Now that I have the theory, which is learn, my textbook, I'm then going to now say, how am I going to use this information and how am I going to include it in the descriptions of the screenshots that I'm going to take? So it's this theory that you've had a look at that you're going to include in your description of the screenshot, plus you're going to link it to the case study. Does that make sense? So this video was all about just simply linking your theory and your case study. If they mention, for example, if I go back to the case study here, how am I going to know where to set the group policies and how to set things on the domain versus the organizational unit? You need to make certain assumptions. So if I go back to the case study, I will look for information as to what is different. So they're speaking about the test center labs. It's different from the ordinary. So I can set different policies for the test center lab based on the case scenario. I can go back and look at the remote branch office. What do they have in the remote branch office that is different? Can I set different policies on the remote branch office? In each of these labs, I need to ask myself, and you can discuss it amongst yourself, what kind of equipment and what kind of policies is going to apply in a training lab versus multimedia versus research versus server room? Is there anything that's going to be different? Think about these things. Then they are telling you here, security, go back. It says restrict access to Facebook, Twitter, flash games, online dating websites, etc. So in terms of the policy and policy settings that you need to set, it's given to you in the case study here, go back and look at it again and say, for user accounts, they're talking about different permissions here. For computer accounts, they are telling me some information. For my security, this is all configured in group policy objects. So I need to look for the relevant settings in the GPO and then link it to the case study. Can you see? So this is how we map theory, case study, and then practical. So in answering a particular part one or part two or your final POE, this is the method that we use. Case study, theory, and then picture. It's not just taking pictures and say a picture is answering the question. No, doesn't work that way. A picture is evidence that you have done something on your server to prove that you know where to go in the server, but you also need theory to back up the picture. Does it make sense? Okay.